The shoes cost $2. Marcus Webb knew this because he had been there when Grandma Ida bought them standing in the narrow aisle of the Goodwill on Halsted Street last March, watching her turn them over in her hands, checking the soles, pressing her thumb against the toe box the way she always did. They were a size too big, but she bought them anyway. Room to grow baby, she had said, and set them in the cart next to a can of chicken noodle soup and a box of oatmeal. He had been embarrassed then. He would not admit that now, not even to himself, but he had been. The other boys at Lincoln Elementary wore Nikes. They wore Jordans. They came to school in shoes that still had that chemical smell of newness, that bright, unscuffed whiteness, that announced to the world that someone had spent real money on them. Marcus came to school in shoes from Goodwill that were a size too big and cost $2. Grandma Ida had seen his face that day in the store. She always saw everything. She had knelt down right there in the aisle, her knees popping the way they always did, and she had looked up at him with those steady, dark eyes that had never once in his 10 years of life looked at him with anything less than total certainty. "Shoes don't make the man baby," she had said. "Character does, and you have more character in your little finger than most people carry in their whole bodies." He had wanted to believe her. He had tried. Now it was November. 8 months later. Grandma Ida had been gone for 2 months and 5 days, and Marcus Webb stood alone on the sidewalk outside First Meridian Heritage Bank in downtown Chicago, holding a brown envelope against his chest like it was the most important thing in the world, because it was. The wind came off Lake Michigan with a cruelty that November reserved for the people who had no choice but to be out in it. It found the gaps in Marcus's jacket, the one that had been Grandma Ida's, and was 3 sizes too large for him, the sleeves hanging past his wrists, the shoulders drooping halfway to his elbows. He had taken it from her closet the morning after the funeral because it still smelled like her. Lavender soap, and something warm underneath, something that had no name but felt like safety. He stood still on the sidewalk for a long moment. The bank rose above him like something from another world. Pale stone columns, brass fittings on the revolving doors, a row of American flags hanging motionless in the cold air, a bronze plaque beside the entrance read, "First Meridian Heritage Bank, established 1887, and below that in smaller letters, serving our community for over a century." Marcus looked at the plaque. He looked at the revolving doors. He looked down at his shoes. Then he thought about what Grandma Ida had said to him 6 months ago, sitting at her kitchen table on a Saturday morning, the smell of chocolate chip pancakes still hanging in the warm air. She had slid the brown envelope across the table toward him, the same brown envelope he was holding right now, and she had folded her hands over his and looked at him the way she always did when she had something important to say. "One day you'll walk into that bank, baby," she had said, "and they'll call you sir. They'll shake your hand. You'll see." He had not fully understood what she meant then. He understood more now. He pushed through the revolving door. The lobby was a different world. Marble floors the color of old cream veined with gray. Ceilings that rose 30 feet overhead, fitted with chandeliers that caught the winter light and broke it into something golden. The air smelled like leather and money and something artificially clean, like a museum after hours. The sounds of the street disappeared entirely the moment the door closed behind him. In their place was a hushed, carpeted quiet, the kind of quiet that had been engineered to make certain people feel welcome and certain other people feel small. Marcus stood still for a moment, letting his eyes adjust. His shoes squeaked faintly on the marble. The sound seemed very loud. There were 6 teller windows along the far wall. 3 were occupied by customers. The other 3 had tellers behind them waiting. Marcus counted the people in line, 4 ahead of him. He joined the back of the queue, straightened his shoulders, and held the brown envelope a little tighter. He waited. The line moved. A man in a gray suit reached the window, transacted his business in under 2 minutes, and left without looking up. A woman in a camel coat stepped forward, deposited a check for what Marcus could see from a distance was a substantial sum, and was thanked warmly by the teller before departing. Another man, another woman, each one processed quickly, efficiently, pleasantly. Marcus stepped forward each time someone left. The third time he stepped forward, a new customer arrived, a man in a golf shirt, maybe 40, with the easy confidence of someone who had never once stood in a line and wondered whether he belonged there. The man walked past the queue entirely straight to the window and said something to the teller that made her laugh. She helped him. No one said anything about the line. Marcus did not say anything either. He stepped back to his place and continued waiting. He understood something about waiting that most 10-year-olds did not. Grandma Ida had taught it to him, not through any single lesson, but through the accumulated example of a life lived with patience as its backbone. She had waited in lines her whole life. She had waited for paychecks that came late and repairs that took longer than promised, and recognition that sometimes never arrived at all. She had never once in his memory made a scene about it. She had simply stood her ground and carried herself and waited with the dignity of a woman who knew that her worth did not depend on how quickly the world acknowledged it. Marcus carried that now. It was heavier than he expected. The fourth time he stepped forward, he was one person from the front. The customer ahead of him finished, and Marcus moved to the window. The teller was a woman with precise blonde highlights and a silk scarf knotted at her throat. Her name tag said, Tamsin Crow, Senior Teller. She looked at Marcus. Then she looked at the empty window to her left. Then she looked back at Marcus. Something passed across her face. It was brief and it was controlled, but it was there. The kind of expression that disappears before the person wearing it will admit they made it. A calculation fast and automatic, the kind that happens below the level of conscious decision, but shapes the conscious decision that follows it. She did not help him. Instead, her hand moved to the console beneath the counter, and she pressed a button. She picked up the phone receiver, said a few quiet words into it, set it down, and looked at Marcus with a professional smile that did not reach her eyes. "If you'll just give me one moment," she said. "I need to get my manager." Marcus nodded. He waited again. He was good at that. There was a corridor to the left of the teller windows, and from that corridor emerged Conrad Hale. He was a large man, not fat, but substantial, the kind of man who filled a room not through physical size alone, but through the particular quality of his confidence, which was the confidence of someone who had never once been told he did not belong somewhere. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him perfectly, and his shoes were polished to a mirror shine, and he moved through the marble lobby with the ease of a man walking through his own living room. He stopped in front of Marcus. He looked at Marcus the way people sometimes look at a stray animal that has wandered into an inappropriate location, not with anger, not yet, but with a kind of performative puzzlement, as if the sight before him required a moment of theatrical processing before he could respond. He let the silence stretch. He was good at that too, but for different reasons than Marcus. Then he said, "Can I help you?" The words were technically a question. They were not intended as one. Marcus met his eyes. "Yes, sir. I'd like to check my account balance, please." Conrad Hale's expression shifted. Something complicated moved through it, amusement and contempt arranged into a shape that he did not bother to conceal. He glanced down. The jacket, the shoes, the brown envelope. He looked around the lobby. There were other customers present, and Conrad Hale was the kind of man who understood the difference between an audience and witnesses, and who preferred the former. "Your account," he said, loud enough to carry. "Yes, sir. My grandmother opened it for me. She passed away 2 months ago. She left me this." Marcus opened the brown envelope and removed the bank card. It was matte black with a silver meridian line running diagonally across its surface. A platinum reserve card, the kind issued only to high net worth account holders. Marcus set it on the marble counter with steady hands. Conrad Hale looked at the card. Something shifted in his face. Not understanding, not yet, because prejudice is a mechanism that protects itself from understanding. What shifted was the calculation. He picked the card up with 2 fingers, turned it over, set it back down. "Where did you get this?" "It's mine, sir. My grandmother left it to me." "Your grandmother." He said the word with a particular emphasis that managed to be both questioning and dismissive at the same time. He looked around the lobby again. His voice was comfortable at this volume. He was not lowering it. "And what exactly did your grandmother do that left you with a platinum reserve card?" "She was a teacher, sir. She taught at Lincoln Elementary for 40 years. Something rippled through the watching lobby. A man near the far window turned slightly. A woman by the door shifted her weight. Conrad Hale looked at the card again. Then he looked at Marcus. Then he looked at the shoes. "A teacher," he said. "Yes, sir." He set the card down on the counter. He did not slide it back toward Marcus. He left it sitting there between them, like an object whose ownership remained in dispute. "This is First Meridian Heritage Bank," he said. He had the tone of a man explaining something to a child who should already know it. "We are not a welfare office. We are not a community resource center. We are a financial institution with standards, and those standards exist for a reason." He paused. "When someone walks in here claiming to have an account without a parent, without a guardian, without a single piece of identification beyond a school library card, and presents a platinum reserve card that frankly does not match their circumstances in any way that makes sense to me, I have a responsibility to this institution to take that seriously." "I have my school ID," Marcus said. His voice was steady. "And my grandmother's letter. She wrote a letter for whoever was in charge." He opened the brown envelope again and removed a folded piece of paper, pale blue, the kind Grandma Ida used for letters, because she had a box of it she had bought at a church sale years ago and refused to waste. He set it on the counter beside the card. Conrad Hale looked at it. He did not pick it up. He looked at it the way a man looks at something he has already decided is worthless, which is to say, he did not really look at it at all. "Do you have any idea," he said, "how many people walk into a bank like this with a story?" He smiled. It was not a warm smile. Everybody's grandmother left them something. Everybody's got a letter. Everybody's got a card they found somewhere, and a reason it's supposedly theirs. He picked up the bank card again. "A platinum reserve account requires a minimum balance in excess of $400,000. He held the card up so the lobby could see it. He was performing now, and he knew it, and he did not care. "A 10-year-old child," he said, "in those shoes, with that jacket, claiming to have a $400,000 bank account." No one laughed, but no one spoke either, and that silence was its own kind of answer. Marcus did not move. He kept his eyes on Conrad Hale's face. He felt the heat in his chest, that rising pressure that wanted to become anger or tears and could not quite decide, and he breathed through it the way Grandma Ida had taught him, slow and even, in through the nose and out through the mouth, until the pressure settled back into something he could carry. Conrad Hale set the card down and slid it across the counter toward Marcus. "I'm going to need you to step aside," he said. "We're going to verify this account through our security protocol, and that is going to take some time." He gestured toward the far corner of the lobby, near a set of doors that Marcus could see led to a corridor with a janitor's closet at the end of it. "You can wait over there. Don't interact with other customers. Don't wander around." He turned away before Marcus could respond. Marcus looked at the corner. It was the least desirable place in the lobby. A hard metal chair bolted to the floor, a water fountain that had an out-of-service sign on it, the janitor's closet door with its dented metal handle, the corridor that led nowhere except further away from the teller windows and the help they contained. Grandma Ida's voice, quiet and certain dignity, is not given baby. It is carried. Marcus walked to the corner. He sat in the metal chair. He put the brown envelope on his lap and looked out at the marble lobby and watched the bank continue its business without him. From the corner by the janitor's closet, everything looked different. He could see the whole lobby from here, the way you can only see a room when you have been pushed to its edge. He watched Tamsin Crow return to her window. He watched her process the next customer with practiced efficiency, a man in a navy blazer who had arrived after Marcus and was served inside of 4 minutes. He watched Conrad Hale walk back toward his corridor, pausing to exchange words with Tamsin that produced a brief shared smile. Their eyes drifted toward the corner. Marcus saw it. He looked away. He looked down at his shoes. He thought about the day Grandma Ida bought them. He thought about the way she had knelt on the floor of the Goodwill on Halsted Street, her knees popping, her hands steady, and looked up at him with those eyes that had never once wavered. She had worn her own shoes until they fell apart. He knew that now in a way he had not known it then. He had watched her fix them with electrical tape, with rubber cement, with whatever she had on hand, until the soles separated completely, and she was forced to buy another pair from the same Goodwill where she bought his. She did this not because she could not afford better, though sometimes she could not, but because every dollar she did not spend on herself was a dollar that stayed in the account she opened the day he was born, the account she had been building for him for 10 years without ever once telling him its exact size, just smiling when he asked and saying, "Enough, baby," more than enough. He had not understood what that meant until 3 weeks after she died, when Uncle Daniel had sat him down and explained quietly and precisely what Grandma Ida had built over 40 years of teaching and 10 years of saving, specifically for him, choosing, again and again, to go without, so that Marcus would have something solid to stand on when she was no longer there to stand beside him. Marcus took the letter out of the envelope. He unfolded it carefully because he had folded and unfolded it so many times in the past 2 months that the creases were beginning to soften, beginning to thin, and he was afraid of what would happen when the paper finally gave way at the fold. He read it. He had it memorized, but he read it anyway, the way you read something when the words on the page are less important than the feeling of the handwriting, the particular slant of letters formed by a specific hand that no longer existed in the world. "My brave Marcus," it began, in her handwriting, which was the handwriting of a woman who had taught penmanship for 4 decades and taken it seriously. Every letter formed with care, every word placed with intention. The world will sometimes be cruel. People will judge you by your shoes, your jacket, the color of your skin. They will try to make you feel worthless. But you are not worthless. You are my greatest treasure. Everything I have saved, everything I have worked for it is all yours now. Use it to fly high. Use it to prove them all wrong. And remember, baby, dignity is not given. It is carried. Carry yours with pride. Always. All my love forever and ever. Grandma Ida. He folded the letter back along its softening creases. He returned it to the envelope. He held the envelope against his chest the same way he had been holding it since he left the apartment that morning, since he walked 14 blocks to the bus stop, since he rode the number 6 downtown, since he stood on the sidewalk looking up at the brass fittings and the pale stone columns and told himself he was ready. He was not sure he was ready, but he was still here. That counted for something. He watched a security guard moving near the entrance. The man's name tag read, Reginald Booker. He was somewhere in his mid-50s, wide through the shoulders, deliberate in his movements with gray creeping into his close-cropped hair. He had the build of a man who had once been powerful and was still formidable, and the face of a man who had learned over a long career to keep what he felt somewhere other than his expression. But Reg Booker had been looking at Marcus. Marcus had noticed, not the way Conrad Hale looked at him, not with contempt or performance. Something different, something that Reg Booker was keeping carefully controlled, the way you keep something controlled when letting it out would cost you something you cannot afford to lose. Their eyes met once across the marble expanse of the lobby. Reg looked away first. It was the second time today that an adult man could not hold Marcus Webb's gaze. The first had been Conrad Hale, though Conrad had looked away because he did not consider Marcus worth looking at. Reg looked away for a different reason, and Marcus, 10 years old and sitting alone in a metal chair by the janitor's closet, understood the difference without being able to name it. He thought about it anyway. He had time. 40 minutes passed. He knew, because he checked his phone, the screen cracked along one corner from a drop in September that he had never gotten fixed, because there was no money for that, and because Grandma Ida would have said, "It still works, baby," and she would have been right. He checked the time at the 10-minute mark, and the 25-minute mark, and the 40-minute mark, and each time the lobby was busier and louder and more full of people who were being helped than it had been before. None of them were Marcus Webb. His phone buzzed. Uncle Daniel. Running about 20 minutes late. Meeting ran long. "You okay, champ?" Marcus started to type a response. His fingers hovered over the cracked screen. He looked at the lobby. He looked at the janitor's closet door. He looked at the metal chair he had been sitting in for 40 minutes. He typed, "Okay." He did not type what was actually happening. He did not want Uncle Daniel to rush. He did not want to be rescued. He wanted what he had come here for, which was the same thing Grandma Ida had wanted for him, which was not rescue, but recognition. Not charity, but what was his. He put the phone back in his pocket, and then Conrad Hale reappeared. He walked across the marble lobby with the same ease as before, but there was something different in his posture now. A decision had been made somewhere in the back offices, and Conrad was carrying it out with the particular efficiency of a man who has convinced himself that what he is about to do is not only justified, but necessary. Conrad Hale stopped in front of the metal chair. He looked down at Marcus. "Let's try this again," he said. His voice had gone colder, more clinical. The performance was shifting from amusement to authority. "As I explained earlier, I've been unable to verify this account through our standard process. The card presents certain irregularities." He paused. "I'm going to need you to leave the premises until you can return with a parent or guardian and appropriate documentation." "I have documentation," Marcus said. He kept his voice even. He had been practicing keeping his voice even for 40 minutes. "I have the card with my name on it. I have my school ID. I have the letter my grandmother wrote. And I have an account at this bank. My grandmother opened it for me when I was born, and she put money in it every single month for 10 years. Conrad Hale looked at him. "Your grandmother?" he said the teacher. "Yes, sir." "Who saved hundreds of thousands of dollars on a teacher's salary?" "Yes, sir." The performance returned. Conrad looked toward the lobby, toward the customers and tellers, and the general audience of the room. He had a gift for this, for making private cruelty into public spectacle, for finding the audience in any room and playing to it. "You understand," he said, "how this sounds. You understand why I cannot simply take the word of a 10-year-old child who walks in off the street and claims to have a platinum reserve account." Marcus looked up at him. He held the man's eyes for a long moment. Then he reached into the brown envelope one more time and removed the letter. He unfolded it slowly and deliberately along those softening creases. He did not hand it to Conrad Hale. He held it in his own hands where it belonged. "My grandmother wrote this letter," Marcus said, "for the person in charge of this bank. She said to give it to whoever was in charge. She knew this might be hard. She knew someone might not believe me. So she wrote it down. Everything. The account number, the amount, her name, her address, her employee number from Lincoln Elementary, where she taught for 40 years. Everything you need to verify that this is real. It is all in here." Conrad Hale looked at the letter. For one moment, one brief and unguarded moment, something passed across his face that was not contempt and was not performance. It was something closer to doubt, the kind of doubt that arrives when the facts in front of you do not arrange themselves the way your certainty requires. Then it was gone. He reached out and took the letter from Marcus's hands, not gently. He took it the way you take something from someone when you want to make clear that the taking is not a privilege you are granting, but a right you are exercising. He glanced at it, not reading, scanning. His eyes moved across the handwriting quickly, the way eyes move across something they have already decided not to take seriously. Then he folded it and held it at his side. "I'll have this reviewed by our compliance team," he said. "In the meantime, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Marcus stood up from the metal chair. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He did not cry, though the thing in his chest that wanted to cry was very close to the surface, now pressing up against the inside of his ribs with a force that would have broken a less carefully constructed composure. He held out his hand. "May I have my grandmother's letter back, please?" he said. Conrad Hale looked at the outstretched hand. Then he looked at the letter. Something moved through his face, and for one moment he seemed to be weighing something he had not expected to weigh. Then he placed the letter in Marcus's hand, not gently, with the minimal contact of a man passing something unpleasant to someone else. Marcus took the letter. He folded it carefully along each crease, the way you fold something precious. He returned it to the brown envelope. He tucked the envelope under his arm. Then he looked at Conrad Hale one more time, directly, without flinching, the steady gaze of a boy who had been taught by a woman with steady eyes. "Thank you for your time, sir," he said. Conrad Hale said nothing. Marcus walked toward the exit. His shoes squeaked once on the marble. He did not look back. Near the entrance, Reg Booker was watching. Marcus saw him step forward slightly, almost involuntarily, his body moving before his mind had authorized the movement, then stopping, then going still again. His hand dropped to his side. His jaw tightened. Their eyes met. Marcus did not nod. He did not smile. He looked at Reg Booker with the steady gaze of someone who is carrying something heavy and has decided they will not set it down. Then he pushed through the revolving door. The cold took him immediately. He walked to the nearest bench in the small plaza outside the bank, a stone bench facing the street, and he sat down. He drew his knees up to his chest inside the oversized jacket and made himself as small as possible against the November wind. He looked down at his shoes, at the cracked soles, at the frayed laces that Grandma Ida had tied for him the day she bought them double-knotted, because she said double-knotted laces never come undone when you need them most. He felt the first tear before he knew he was crying. Just one and then another, and he let them come because Grandma Ida had told him that boys feel that feeling is not weakness, but evidence that something matters, that you do not cry about things that do not matter. This mattered. He cried quietly on the stone bench in the November wind alone. He did not make noise. He just let his face be wet and sat very still and held the brown envelope against his chest and breathed in through the nose and out through the mouth the way she had taught him. He did not know how long he sat there. It might have been 5 minutes. It might have been 10. He heard footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, the careful footsteps of someone who was approaching him on purpose, not passing through. He looked up. She was an older woman, white-haired in her 70s, with a good wool coat and sensible shoes, and the kind of face that had spent a long time in the sun and showed it honestly without apology. She had a leather purse over one arm and a set of car keys in her hand, which told Marcus she had already left the bank, already reached her car, and had come back. She stopped in front of him. She looked at him for a moment with an expression he did not have a word for. It was not pity. It was something more complicated than pity, something that had guilt inside it and something else alongside the guilt that was working against the guilt, pushing it somewhere more useful. "Are you okay, son?" she said. 3 words. Marcus pressed his lips together hard. He nodded once. The woman looked at the bank door, then back at him. She sat down on the bench beside him. She did not say anything else for a moment. She just sat, there in the November cold, on the stone bench, with her car keys still in her hand. She had seen everything Marcus understood. She had been inside the bank. She had watched. and she had walked out and gotten as far as her car, and she had not been able to drive away. Something had stopped her, some mechanism slower and more fundamental than the mechanisms of comfort and self-protection, and it had brought her back. He did not know her name, she did not know his, but she sat beside him in the cold, and that was something. It was the only kind thing anyone had done for him since he walked through those revolving doors. He was still sitting with her when the black SUV turned into the plaza. The vehicle moved with the quiet authority of something expensive and well-maintained. It stopped near the entrance. The door opened and a man stepped out, 6'2", maybe 6'3", a gray suit that had been tailored to fit him exactly, silver at the temples, the kind of posture that comes not from arrogance, but from having spent so long certain of your own worth that the certainty has settled into your bones and become indistinguishable from the bones themselves. Uncle Daniel Webb saw his nephew before he saw anything else. He saw the stone bench, he saw the oversized jacket, he saw the brown envelope pressed against Marcus's chest. He saw the tear tracks that Marcus had not finished wiping from his face. Uncle Daniel's jaw tightened. A muscle moved beneath his eye, a small, involuntary thing, the only visible sign of something very large happening underneath. He walked toward the bench with measured steps, and when he reached it, he did not straighten to his full height and survey the situation. He did not reach for his phone. He did not look at the bank. He knelt down on the cold stone plaza, right there in his tailored gray suit, until he was at eye level with a 10-year-old boy in a $2 pair of shoes. "Hey, champ," he said. His voice was very quiet, very steady, the voice of a man who had decided what was most important in this moment, and it was not the bank behind him, or the injustice inside it, or the email he needed to send, or the call he needed to make. It was the child in front of him. Marcus looked at his uncle. The composure he had been carrying for the past hour, the composure he had maintained through 40 minutes in a metal chair, and Conrad Hale's voice, and the letter being taken from his hands, and the squeaking shoes on the marble, and all of it, that composure came apart at the seams. "Uncle Daniel," he said. He did not say anything else. He did not need to. Daniel Webb opened his arms, and Marcus Webb walked into them, and the brown envelope was pressed between them, and Daniel held his nephew with the steadiness of someone who intended to hold on for as long as it took, and said nothing because there was nothing to say yet, because first you hold on, and then you listen, and then you act. The woman with the white hair and the wool coat stood up quietly from the bench. She looked at the two of them for a moment. Then she looked at the bank. Her expression had moved past guilt and past something else, and arrived at a place that looked very much like resolution. Her car keys were still in her hand. She looked at them. Then she put them back in her purse. She turned and walked back through the revolving doors. Daniel held his nephew in the cold and waited for the shaking to stop. Then he said, "Tell me everything." And Marcus Webb, 10 years old, in his grandmother's too large jacket and his $2 shoes with the double-knotted laces, took a breath. And he did. Marcus told it the way Grandma Ida had taught him to tell things, from the beginning, in order, without leaving anything out. He told Daniel about the line and the 3 times he had been passed over while customers who arrived after him were served without question. He told him about Tamsin Crow and the button she had pressed beneath the counter, the small, deliberate choice she had made before Marcus even had a chance to speak. He told him about Conrad Hale walking out of that corridor with the ease of a man crossing his own living room, and the way he had held the Platinum Reserve card up for the lobby to see, like evidence in a trial where the verdict had already been decided before the evidence was presented. He told him about the metal chair by the janitor's closet, about the 40 minutes, about watching a man in a golf shirt receive a handshake from Conrad Hale, while Marcus sat in the corner like something that needed to be contained rather than helped. He told him about the letter, about Conrad Hale taking it from his hands, about the way he had asked for it back. Daniel listened to all of it without speaking. He did not interrupt. He did not make sounds of outrage or reassurance. He simply listened the way a man listens when he understands that what is being given to him is not just information, but weight, and that the act of receiving it properly is itself a form of care. When Marcus finished, Daniel was quiet for a moment. The wind moved through the plaza. A cab passed on the street. Somewhere above them, a flag snapped against its pole with a sharp, clean sound. "You did nothing wrong," Daniel said. His voice was level and certain. "Nothing. Do you understand me?" Marcus nodded. "Say it back to me. I did nothing wrong." Daniel looked at him for a long moment. Then he stood up from his crouch slowly, and something in his posture changed as he rose. Not dramatically, not the way anger announces itself in movies with raised voices and clenched fists. It was quieter than that and more serious, the way a very still body of water changes when something large beneath the surface begins to move. He reached into his jacket pocket and removed his phone. He did not call a lawyer. He did not call anyone at the bank. He pressed a single contact and waited 2 rings. "Renee," he said when the line connected. His voice was the same voice he had used with Marcus, calm and measured, but underneath it now was something that Renee, whoever she was, clearly recognized immediately because she said nothing and waited. "I need you to draft an email." He paused. "To the full board of First Meridian Heritage Bank. Subject line: Portfolio Review Notification. Body: Crestline Capital is initiating an immediate review of its institutional position in First Meridian Heritage Bank, effective as of today. All scheduled meetings and forward commitments are suspended pending completion of that review. Send it from my address. Right now." He listened for a moment. "Yes," he said. "Right now. Thank you." He ended the call and put the phone back in his pocket. Marcus watched him. "Do you own the bank?" he asked. Daniel almost smiled. "No." He looked at the building. "But we own enough of it that the people who run it will want to know why I'm asking questions." He looked down at Marcus. He straightened the collar of Marcus's jacket, the oversized one that had been Grandma Ida's, with the same matter-of-fact tenderness that Ida herself had used when she straightened things, a gesture so familiar it created a small, sharp pain behind Marcus's sternum. Then Daniel said, "You ready to go back in?" Marcus looked at the revolving doors, the brass fittings, the pale stone columns, the plaque that said, "Serving our community for over a century." He thought about the metal chair, about the 40 minutes, about the way Conrad Hale's hand had come down on the letter. He thought about Grandma Ida at the kitchen table 6 months ago, the smell of pancakes, her hands folded over his. Dignity is not given, baby. It is carried. He picked up the brown envelope from the bench. He tucked it under his arm. He looked at his uncle. "I go first," Marcus said. Daniel looked at him. Something moved through his expression. Not surprise exactly. Something quieter and deeper than surprise. Something that recognized itself. He stepped back, half a pace, enough to make it clear. Marcus Webb walked toward the revolving door. His shoes squeaked once on the plaza stone. He pushed through and the lobby received him again, the marble and the chandeliers and the engineered quiet. And this time he did not stop just inside the entrance and let his eyes adjust. This time he walked straight in. Behind him, Daniel followed, one step back, as agreed. The lobby registered their arrival the way a room registers something that disturbs its equilibrium, not all at once, not loudly, but in a series of small adjustments. A teller looked up from her window. A customer near the far wall turned. Tamsin Crow behind her counter saw Marcus first, and her expression flickered with something she did not manage to fully conceal before she saw the man behind him. Then she saw Daniel. She reached for her phone. Conrad Hale had been notified. Marcus could see it happening, could see the information traveling through the bank's nervous system, the way bad news travels through any closed system, quickly and without mercy. By the time they had walked 20 feet into the lobby, Conrad Hale was already emerging from his corridor. He saw Director Sylvia Hartwell first. She was standing near the center of the lobby, which was not where she had been standing when Marcus left, because she had not been there when Marcus left. She had arrived while Marcus was outside on the bench. She was a trim woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair, cut close, and a charcoal suit that communicated authority without announcing it. She had the still attentive quality of someone who has learned to observe everything while appearing to observe nothing in particular. A woman who had reached her position by being, among other things, very good at reading rooms. She was reading this one carefully. Conrad Hale's face when he saw her went the color of old chalk. The sequence was visible. Conrad processing Sylvia Hartwell's presence. Conrad processing the man beside Marcus. Conrad's eyes moving to the logo on Daniel's lapel pin, the small silver C of Crestline Capital that anyone in regional banking would recognize. Conrad's face moving through confusion and then recognition, and then the particular species of terror that comes from understanding that the worst possible version of a situation is the one you are currently standing in, and that you have been standing in it for over an hour without knowing it. He stopped walking, just for a moment. Then he continued because there was nothing else to do. "Director Hartwell," he said. He managed to keep his voice mostly steady. "We weren't expecting you today. Plans change," Sylvia Hartwell said. She did not smile. She looked at Daniel. "Mr. Webb." "Director Hartwell." Daniel's voice was courteous and completely without warmth. "Thank you for coming on short notice." She nodded once. She looked at Marcus. "And you must be Marcus." Marcus looked up at her. "Yes, ma'am." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked at Conrad Hale with the expression of a woman who has been given a file she has not yet opened, but already knows will not contain good news. "I'd like to start at the teller window," she said. "My understanding is that there's an account to be accessed." Conrad opened his mouth, then closed it, then said, "Of course, whatever you need." They walked to the teller windows. The lobby was very quiet. The remaining customers had developed the particular stillness of people who understand they are witnessing something significant, but are not sure yet what it is. Tamsin Crow stood behind her window. Her face was the color of the marble counter in front of her. "Please pull up the account for Marcus Webb," Sylvia Hartwell said. Tamsin's hands moved to her keyboard. They were not entirely steady. She typed, she waited, she looked at the screen, then she looked up. "The account is here," she said. Her voice was barely audible. She cleared her throat. "Marcus Webb. The account was opened 10 years ago." She paused. "The balance is current." "What is the balance?" Sylvia Hartwell asked. The lobby was very quiet, the kind of quiet that gathers around a moment before the moment happens, as if the air itself knows something is coming. Tamsin Crow looked at the screen. She looked at Marcus. She looked at the screen again. 489,000, she said. $412. The number landed in the lobby the way a stone lands in still water. It displaced everything around it. It sent ripples outward through the air, through the marble, through the people standing in it. $489,412. 40 years of a teacher's salary. 40 years of bus rides in the snow. 40 years of oatmeal from the Goodwill on Halsted Street, and winter coats worn until the lining gave out, and shoes fixed with rubber cement until the soles separated completely. 40 years of choosing again and again and again to go without. All of it right there on a screen in a marble lobby. Marcus stared at the number. He had known in an abstract way since the day Uncle Daniel had sat him down and explained that the account existed and that it was large. But knowing a thing and seeing it are different. Seeing it on a screen in this lobby, in these shoes after this morning, was something he did not have a word for yet. It was the kind of thing that needed time to become language, the way grief needs time before it can be spoken. He felt Daniel's hand come to rest on his shoulder. Light, steady. She saved all that Marcus said. His voice was very quiet, not performing quietness, simply quiet. Daniel's hand tightened slightly on his shoulder. Every single penny, he said. Marcus nodded. He looked at the number for another long moment. He thought about the coat with the broken zipper, the television that took 5 minutes to warm up, the reading glasses held together with tape. He thought about all the things she had not bought, all the comfort she had not taken, all the years of choosing the bus instead of a car, and the store brand instead of the name brand, and the repair instead of the replacement. All of it here, all of it for him. Then he said, the same way you say something when you stop wondering and start knowing, for me. Not a question. Sylvia Hartwell looked at Conrad Hale. The look lasted approximately 3 seconds and contained a great deal that did not need to be spoken aloud. Then she said, I'd like to see the full transaction history. Tamsin's hands moved again. The screen refreshed, and there it was, the complete record of Ida Webb's 10 years of monthly faith, displayed in columns of dates and amounts that together told a story more complete and more devastating than any language could manage. Monthly deposits, every month, without exception. Months when the amount was smaller, when money had been tight, when something had broken or needed replacing, and there was less to set aside. But she had set something aside anyway, because she had made a promise to herself and to a child who did not yet understand the weight of the promise being made on his behalf. But never zero. Not once in 10 years did the monthly deposit fail to appear. The most recent entry was dated 10 years to the month from the first. And then Tamsin Crow's hand stopped moving. She was looking at something on the screen. Her face changed. What is it? Sylvia Hartwell asked. Tamsin looked up. She looked at Marcus. She looked at Daniel. She looked at Sylvia Hartwell. There's a notation on the account, she said. She cleared her throat again. The last deposit was made on November 3rd. Everyone waited. Ida Webb passed away on November 9th, Daniel said quietly. The lobby absorbed this. She made the last deposit 6 days before she died, Tamsin said. The words came out smaller than she intended, as if the weight of them had compressed them in transit, as if even the act of speaking them required something she had not known she would need to spend. No one spoke for a moment. The chandeliers threw their golden light across the marble floor. Outside, through the tall windows, Chicago continued its indifferent November business traffic, and wind and the distant sound of a siren blocks away the city that does not stop for anything. Conrad Hale was looking at the floor. He had been looking at the floor for some time now. His charcoal suit, which had fit him so perfectly an hour ago, seemed suddenly to belong to a slightly larger and more confident man than the one currently standing inside it. Daniel turned to look at him. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The lobby was so quiet that a raised voice would have been excess, and Daniel Webb was not a man who dealt in excess. She was sick, Daniel said. The last month of her life she was very sick, and 6 days before she died, she made sure that deposit went through. Conrad said nothing, because that was who Ida Webb was. Daniel continued. She was a woman who rode the bus to school in January when the temperature dropped to 0. She was a woman who wore the same winter coat for 15 years because every dollar she did not spend on herself was a dollar that stayed in this account for this child. She ate store-brand groceries. She fixed her shoes with rubber cement. She did without deliberately and consistently and without complaint. For 40 years of teaching and 10 years of saving for Marcus so that this child would have something when she was gone. He paused. And you threw him out, Daniel said. You called him a beggar. You held up his grandmother's card in front of a lobby full of people and implied he had stolen it. You put him in a chair by the janitor's closet and left him there for 40 minutes and then told him to leave. Conrad's jaw worked. If I had known who he was, he began. Daniel stopped him, not with volume, with stillness, the kind of stillness that is more commanding than any raised voice. That sentence, he said, is your entire problem. Right there, if you had known who he was. He looked at Conrad Hale for a long moment. You would have treated him differently if you had known he had money. Your respect has a price tag, but his grandmother's dignity did not, and neither does his. The lobby was silent. No one moved, no one spoke. The tellers stood behind their windows. The remaining customers stood where they had been standing when the conversation began. The chandeliers threw their golden light across the marble floor. Sylvia Hartwell said, "Conrad, my office." Now, she meant his office. They both knew it. The phrasing was deliberate, a small, precise signal of how completely the ground had shifted. Conrad walked. His footsteps, which had been so assured an hour ago, were different now. He moved like a man navigating unfamiliar terrain, in the dark, careful, and diminishing further with each step. Sylvia Hartwell followed. She paused at the edge of the teller area and looked back at Marcus. "I'll need a few minutes," she said. "Then we'll take care of everything. I'm sorry for what happened today." She said it directly and without qualification, looking at him squarely. Those last 6 words carried the gravity of someone who understood that an apology in this situation was both necessary and insufficient, and who said them anyway because they were true. Marcus nodded. Daniel squeezed his shoulder once. Then he followed Sylvia Hartwell toward the back offices because there were things that needed to be said in private, and he was the one to say them. And Marcus Webb stood alone in the middle of the lobby, not in the corner by the janitor's closet, not beside a metal chair, in the center of the marble floor beneath the chandeliers, holding the brown envelope under his arm. He looked at Tamsin Crow. She was still behind her window. She had not moved since she read the transaction history. She was looking at her screen, but Marcus could see that she was not reading it anymore. She was looking through it at something behind it that only she could see. The deposits, perhaps. The dates. The last one 6 days before the end. She became aware of his gaze and looked up. They looked at each other across the marble counter. Tamsin Crow's face moved through several things in a short period of time. He watched them move across it, the way weather moves across an open sky, visible and unstoppable. He watched her arrive at something that was not comfortable, but was honest, the particular honesty that becomes available only after pretense has been made impossible. She looked down at her keyboard. She reached beneath the counter and removed a piece of paper. She looked at it for a long moment, holding it in both hands. Her face was doing something complicated. Then she stood up from her window and she walked across the lobby toward the corridor where Sylvia Hartwell and Daniel had gone, and she walked the way people walk when they have made a decision that is going to cost them something, and they are walking toward the cost before they lose their nerve. She disappeared through the door. Marcus stood in the center of the lobby. Reg Booker was still near the entrance. He had been there the whole time, standing at his post, arms at his sides now instead of crossed. He had watched everything. The arrival, the confrontation, the number on the screen, Daniel's words. He had watched all of it, and his face had the particular controlled stillness of a man holding himself together by force of will. He looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at him. Then Reg walked toward him. Not quickly. The walk of a man who has made a decision and is committed to it, but is not running from what the decision means. He stopped in front of Marcus. He was a big man, and from a distance, he had looked formidable. Up close, he looked tired, the kind of tired that accumulates over years, not hours. He reached into his jacket pocket and removed something. He held it out. Marcus's phone, the cracked one. He had picked it up. Marcus remembered dropping it the moment the revolving door closed behind him, the first time when his hands had been shaking too badly to hold it. He remembered hearing it hit the marble floor. He had not gone back for it. Reg had picked it up and kept it until now. Marcus took the phone. He looked up at Reg. "I should have spoken up," Reg said. His voice was low. The words came out with the deliberateness of something that had been waiting a long time for the right moment and was not entirely sure, even now, that the moment was adequate. "I'm sorry." Marcus held the phone. He looked at Reg Booker's face, at the lines in it, at the gray in his hair, at the 11 years of silence that lived somewhere behind his eyes. "Why didn't you?" Marcus asked. It was a real question, not an accusation, the kind of question that a 10-year-old asks when he genuinely wants to understand something about the world that does not yet make sense to him, something that he suspects has an answer worth hearing. Reg was quiet for a moment. His hands were at his sides. His jaw moved slightly. "Because I was afraid," he said, "of losing what I've got. My job, my pension, my daughter's tuition." He paused. He seemed to be examining the words as he said them, turning them over, testing whether they were true or only convenient. They were both. That's not enough of a reason. But it's the true one. Marcus looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded, a single nod. Not forgiveness, because forgiveness was not his to give or withhold on behalf of everyone. Reg Booker had stayed silent for over 11 years. But an acknowledgement, a receipt. The boy understood what the man was telling him, and the understanding itself was something. It was not nothing. Reg exhaled. It was a small sound, but it was real. There was movement near the entrance. The white-haired woman who had sat beside Marcus on the stone bench, the one with the wool coat and the car keys, had come inside. She was speaking to a young woman at the customer service desk, and from her posture and the deliberateness of her expression, Marcus could see that she was not there to complain about a service fee or ask about interest rates. She was giving a statement. Her car keys were in her purse now. She had decided. Marcus watched her for a moment. Then he looked back at Reg. "She came back," Marcus said. "Twice." Reg followed his gaze. He watched the woman lean forward and say something to the customer service representative, something firm and unhurried, the statement of a witness who has decided to be one. "Yeah," Reg said softly. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Some people do." The door to the back corridor opened. Sylvia Hartwell came out. She walked directly to Marcus and stopped in front of him with the bearing of someone who has completed an unpleasant but necessary task and is prepared now for whatever comes next. "Your account will be fully accessible immediately," she said. "All holds have been removed." She paused. "Conrad Hale has been suspended pending a full investigation, effective today." She said it to Marcus, not to the room, not for the benefit of the lobby or the remaining customers, directly to a 10-year-old boy in a $2 pair of shoes, because he was the person to whom it needed to be said. Marcus held the brown envelope. He nodded. Sylvia Hartwell looked at him for a moment. She seemed to be choosing her next words with care, with the same deliberateness that marked all her movements. "I knew your grandmother," she said. "Not well, but I met her once at a community education event 3 or 4 years ago. She was exactly what you would expect from someone who had spent 40 years in a classroom." She paused. "She was talking about you." "She was always talking about you." Marcus looked at her. "She was very proud," Sylvia said simply. The lobby was quiet. Daniel reappeared from the corridor. He came to stand beside Marcus. He did not say anything. He simply stood there, present and solid, one step behind, as agreed. Marcus looked at the teller windows, at the marble floor, at the chandeliers, at the plaque on the wall inside the lobby that he had not noticed before, smaller than the one outside, engraved with words that someone in 1887 had thought were important enough to put in bronze. He looked at the brown envelope in his hands. He thought about Grandma Ida at the kitchen table, the smell of chocolate chip pancakes, her hands folded over his, the certainty in her eyes that had never wavered. "One day they'll shake your hand in there, baby. You'll see." He had not understood then. He was beginning to understand now. But Daniel was not finished. He had come back from the office with something in his posture that was different from the controlled fury that had carried him in, something that had the quality of the morning after a storm, when the air is scrubbed clean and the light is different. "There's something else," Sylvia Hartwell said. She looked at Daniel. She looked at Marcus. She seemed to be waiting to see if Daniel would tell it or if she should. Daniel said, "When they pulled up the full account records, they found something." He paused. Your grandmother's account had a secondary designation on it, a small automatic transfer set up 10 years ago the same month she opened your account. Marcus waited. $25 a month, Daniel said, transferred automatically to the Lincoln Elementary Community Scholarship Fund every month for 10 years without interruption. The lobby was very quiet. She was setting aside money for you, Daniel continued, and at the same time she was setting aside $25 every month for other children, children she had not met, children she would never meet, children who sat in her classroom year after year, decade after decade, and then grew up and left and were replaced by new children with new needs, and she had decided that $25 a month was not too small a thing to matter. Marcus stood very still. He thought about the coat with the broken zipper, the television that took 5 minutes to warm up, the reading glasses held together with tape, the shoes fixed with rubber cement, the oatmeal and the store-brand groceries, and the bus in the snow. She had been doing all of that, all of it, and she had been doing it not just for him, but for children she would never know, setting aside money for strangers from the same account from which she denied herself everything, beginning on the day Marcus was born, because she had looked at a newborn child and decided simultaneously that she would give him everything, and that giving everything to one person was not the same as giving enough. The tears came, not quickly. They arrived the way understanding arrives gradually, and then all at once, and Marcus did not try to stop them. He stood in the center of the marble lobby, with his face wet and the brown envelope against his chest, and let himself feel the full weight of what she had been, of who she had chosen to be every single month for 10 years while wearing shoes she fixed with rubber cement and a coat with a broken zipper. He stood with it. He let it be as large as it was. Then he wiped his face with the back of his hand. He took a breath. He straightened his shoulders inside the oversized jacket. Daniel put his hand on Marcus's shoulder and left it there. Marcus looked at the lobby, at Reg Booker standing near the entrance with his arms at his sides and his face not entirely still, at the white-haired woman still at the customer service desk, her voice steady, her statement unhurried, at the teller windows and the marble floor and the chandeliers and all of it. "What do you want to do?" Champ Daniel said. His voice was quiet. Marcus thought about it. He thought about it carefully, the way Grandma Ida had taught him to think about things that mattered, from the inside out, starting with what was true and working outward from there. "I want to keep it going," Marcus said. He looked up at Daniel. "What she started. The scholarship. I want to keep it going." Daniel looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Sylvia Hartwell. She was already nodding. The consequences arrived quietly. That was the thing about real consequences. Marcus would understand much later, when he was old enough to have accumulated enough of his own. They do not always announce themselves with drama. Sometimes they arrive the way winter arrives in Chicago, not all at once, but in degrees a little colder each morning, until one day you look out the window and the world has changed completely, and you cannot remember exactly when it happened. Conrad Hale's suspension was effective immediately. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, his access credentials had been deactivated. By 5, the locks on his office had been changed. By the following morning, the investigation that Sylvia Hartwell had promised was already underway. 3 members of the regional compliance team, going through every record, every interaction log, every customer complaint that had been filed and then quietly filed away over the previous 15 years. There were more of those than anyone had expected. The investigation took 11 days. Marcus was not there for any of it. He was at school and at home and at the kitchen table in Uncle Daniel's apartment, doing his homework and eating dinner and sleeping in the room that Daniel had set up for him after the funeral, the room with the window that looked out over the street and the bookshelf that still had gaps in it where more books needed to go. He was living his life. That was what Grandma Ida had saved the money for. On the 12th day, Daniel sat him down at the kitchen table and told him the results. Conrad Hale had been terminated for cause not suspended, terminated. The investigation had confirmed discriminatory conduct, falsification of an incident report, and a pattern of behavior toward customers that the bank's own policies explicitly prohibited. His termination came with no severance beyond what the law required. His professional references were closed. The industry was smaller than it appeared from the outside, and word traveled in it, the way word travels in any closed community, efficiently and without mercy. Conrad Hale applied to 4 other banks in the Chicago area over the following months. He was not hired by any of them. He spent the better part of a year moving through smaller and smaller positions before landing at a check-cashing operation in a strip mall in Evanston, where the clientele consisted largely of the same kinds of people he had spent 15 years dismissing. Whether this changed him, no one who had known him at First Meridian Heritage could say with any certainty. He did not return to their lives. He became one of those people who exist in the past tense, a lesson rather than a presence, his name invoked occasionally and quietly when people at the bank needed to remind themselves of something they did not want to forget. Tamsin Crow kept her job. This was because of what she had done in the corridor, the voluntary surrender of the incident report. She had signed the report that had described Marcus Webb as an aggressive minor attempting fraud. The compliance team had weighed that action carefully. It did not erase what she had done. It did not undo the button she had pressed beneath the counter. The choice she had made when Marcus set the Platinum Reserve card in front of her and she decided the situation required a manager rather than her own judgment and basic human decency. Those things remained in the record, but the voluntary disclosure mattered. It was the difference between someone who had made a wrong choice and someone who, when given the opportunity, had chosen to correct it, between a person who was capable of complicity and a person who was also capable of something else. She was issued a formal reprimand. She completed a mandatory training program. She was transferred to a branch on the north side where nobody knew her name or what she had done, which was both a punishment and a mercy. She took the transfer without complaint. She showed up to the new branch on her first day and did her job, and continued doing it with a carefulness and a specific quality of attention she had not possessed before. She thought about Marcus Webb for a long time afterward. She thought about the transaction history on that screen, about the deposits every month for 10 years, never missing, once the last one, 6 days before the end. She thought about the moment she had read those entries and understood what she had been looking at, what she had pressed a button to prevent a 10-year-old child from accessing. She thought about what it meant that she had not even looked at the account before pressing the button. That thought lived with her. It did not go away with time. It settled into a permanent residence in some corner of her conscience and paid its rent punctually and refused to be evicted. She was still carrying it 6 months later when she resigned from banking entirely and enrolled in a social work program at Loyola University. She would not have been able to explain exactly why she made that choice, except that she had been sitting with something for 6 months that had no resolution inside the world she currently occupied, and she needed to find a different world, one in which the button she pressed opened something instead of closing it. She graduated 3 years later. She went to work for a family services organization on the west side of Chicago. She was good at it, in the particular way that people are good at things when they are partly working off a debt they cannot otherwise repay, with a kind of sustained and attentive care that does not burn out because it is fueled by something more durable than enthusiasm. Reg Booker stayed. He stayed at First Meridian Heritage Bank for 3 more years until his pension vested fully and his youngest daughter finished her 2nd year of college. He stayed because he had made a promise not to Daniel Webb or to Sylvia Hartwell or to the bank itself, but to Marcus on the marble floor of the lobby in the quiet after everything had changed. "Next time I speak up," he had said, "no matter what." He was tested on this 22 days after the incident. A young black woman came into the bank on a Wednesday afternoon in early December. She was trying to open a savings account. She had her identification, her social security card, her proof of address, everything the process required. The teller who was helping her was new, young, and impatient in the way that young people who are new to a small authority are sometimes impatient, who have not yet learned that impatience is a form of power, and power misused is power wasted. His sighs were becoming audible. His eye contact was becoming intermittent. His manner had acquired the particular quality of condescension that does not announce itself as condescension, but is unmistakable to anyone who has been on the receiving end of it. Reg watched from across the lobby. He watched for 90 seconds. That was how long it took him to be certain of what he was seeing. 90 seconds when 11 years ago he would have watched for much longer, or would not have watched at all, or would have watched and cataloged what he saw under the heading of "not my business" and moved on. Then he walked over. He was not loud. He did not make a scene. He simply came to stand beside the teller window and said in a voice that was calm and entirely clear, "Is there a problem here?" The teller started to explain. Reg cut him off, not rudely, with precision. "This woman has her documentation," Reg said. "She's been waiting patiently. Help her properly, or I'll find someone who can." The teller's face went through several things rapidly. Then he nodded. He turned back to the customer. He helped her properly. The account was opened in 11 minutes. The young woman looked at Reg as she gathered her paperwork. She did not say anything. She nodded once. Reg nodded back. He returned to his post by the entrance. His hands were shaking slightly. He put them in his pockets. His heart was beating harder than the situation warranted, and he understood why. 11 years of silence creates a particular kind of pressure, and releasing that pressure, even once, even in a small way, even in a quiet voice, over a teller window feels like something physical, like a valve opening, like breathing after being underwater for a very long time. When you break the surface and your lungs expand and the air comes in, and you understand in a way that is deeper than thought what it means to have been without something necessary. He had told Marcus he would speak up next time, no matter what. He had meant it when he said it. He meant it more now that he had done it. Each time after that was easier, and the ease itself felt like a kind of restoration, like a man finding his way back to something he had lost so long ago he had nearly forgotten he ever had it. Dorothy Fane submitted a formal written statement to the compliance investigation, 4 pages handwritten in the careful script of a woman who had been a school teacher herself for many years before retirement, and who understood that how you write something is part of what you are saying. She described in precise sequence everything she had witnessed on the morning of November 14th. She described Conrad Hale's conduct. She described the incident report she had overheard being discussed. She described the metal chair by the janitor's closet and the length of time Marcus had been left in it. She described the lobby's silence, the absence of intervention, the way the room had collectively looked away. She included in her statement a paragraph about herself, about the fact that she had been in that lobby and had said nothing, about the 8 minutes she had sat in her car in the parking lot before she came back. She did not ask for credit for coming back. She offered the 8 minutes as evidence of how easy it was to look away, how automatic, how the mechanisms of comfort and self-protection could carry a person almost all the way out the door before something else, something slower and less automatic, pulled them back. She was 71 years old, she wrote. She had been a customer of First Meridian Heritage Bank for 33 years. She had watched a 10-year-old child be treated with systematic contempt in the lobby of an institution she had trusted, and she had nearly driven away. She was glad she had not. Her statement became part of the permanent record. It was, as Daniel had anticipated, the cleanest piece of evidence in the file. It came from someone with no stake in the outcome, no relationship to the parties involved, no reason to tell it any particular way except the way it happened. Sylvia Hartwell read it 3 times. Then she called Daniel Webb. "I want to do something," she said, "beyond the disciplinary measures, something that matters past this particular moment." Daniel said, "What did you have in mind?" She said she was not sure yet. She said she thought it should come from Marcus, or at least start from him. She said she had met Ida Webb once years ago at a community education event, and that a person like that deserved better than a compliance report as her legacy. Daniel said he would talk to Marcus. He did that evening at the kitchen table. Marcus was doing a worksheet on long division. Daniel sat across from him and waited until the worksheet was done, because Grandma Ida had taught Marcus to finish what he started, and Daniel respected that. He had come to respect a great many things about the way Grandma Ida had raised this boy. Then he told him about Sylvia Hartwell's call. Marcus set his pencil down. He thought about it. Outside the apartment window, Chicago was dark and cold, the street lit orange by the lamps, a few flakes of snow moving sideways in the wind. She was a teacher, Marcus said finally. He was not talking to Daniel specifically. He was thinking out loud, working something through the way Grandma Ida had always worked things through slowly and from the inside. She always said the best thing you can do with money is make sure the next kid doesn't have to struggle the way you did. Daniel waited. The scholarship she was already giving to Marcus said, "The one with the $25 a month. Is it still going?" Daniel said he could find out. "Find out," Marcus said. "And if it's still going, I want to keep it going." He paused. "And I want to make it bigger." Daniel looked at his nephew, at the worksheet on long division, at the pencil, at the kitchen table that had belonged to Ida and that Daniel had brought to the apartment after the funeral because Marcus needed something of hers in the room where he ate. "Bigger," how Daniel said. Marcus looked at him. 2 scholarships a year, he said. Full ones, not just $25 a month, real ones, for kids who need them. He paused, and in the pause, Daniel could see him finding the right words, the specific words, the ones that meant what he needed them to mean, and not something approximate, not just the smartest kids, the ones who carry themselves right even when things are hard, the ones who don't give up even when somebody's treating them like they don't belong. Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Your grandmother would have designed it exactly that way," he said. Marcus picked up his pencil. He looked at the worksheet. Then he said, without looking up, "I want to call it the Ida Webb Scholarship, not the Ida Brooks Scholarship. Webb. Her name, the name she had when she was teaching." Daniel nodded. He did not say anything else because there was nothing else to say, and he understood that. The Ida Webb Scholarship was established formally in January, 4 months after the incident at the bank. It was administered through a community foundation that Daniel's company had worked with before, which meant it had infrastructure and oversight and the legal architecture to sustain it, past the moment of its founding, past the emotion that had created it, into the ongoing practical work of doing what it was created to do. Sylvia Hartwell's bank contributed a significant sum to its initial endowment, a contribution that was not publicized and was not intended to be. It was not a PR exercise. It was an acknowledgement offered quietly in the direction of a woman who had spent her life doing things quietly and in the direction of good. The selection criteria were written by Marcus himself, with Daniel beside him at the kitchen table over the course of 2 evenings in December. 2 scholarships per year, full tuition and materials for the recipient's final year of elementary school and first year of middle school, open to students from Chicago's underserved communities, no GPA minimum. The selection rubric, in Marcus's words, revised slightly for formal language, but kept close to his original draft read as follows: recipients will be selected based on demonstrated dignity in the face of hardship. This means not the student who has suffered the most or the student who has achieved the most despite suffering, but the student who has continued to carry themselves with integrity and care for others even when the world gave them every reason not to. Sylvia Hartwell read the rubric and did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, "How old is he?" Daniel said, 10. She shook her head slowly. She signed the documents. The first recipients were announced the following September, when Marcus had just started 6th grade. There were 2 of them as specified. One was a boy from the South Side who had been his school's unofficial translator for 3 new students who did not speak English well, despite having no particular reason to take that on beyond the fact that he had noticed they were struggling, and he was someone who, when he noticed a person struggling, tried to help. The other was a girl. She was 9 years old. She attended Lincoln Elementary, the same school where Ida Webb had taught for 40 years. Her teacher had submitted her nomination with a single sentence of justification. She carries herself with dignity no matter what. Daniel showed Marcus her photograph when the selection was announced. He set it on the kitchen table beside the pencil and the worksheet and the familiar wood surface that had belonged to Ida. Marcus looked at the photograph. She had a jacket that was slightly too big for her. Her shoes, visible at the bottom of the picture, were worn at the toe. She was standing in what appeared to be a school hallway, looking directly at the camera with the expression of someone who has been told to smile for a photo and has decided instead to simply look directly, without apology. The expression was steady. It was clear. It did not perform itself for anyone. Marcus sat very still for a long time. Then he reached out and touched the edge of the photograph with one finger. Not the face, the shoes. He nodded once. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That's the one." He did not say anything else. He did not need to. The years passed, the way years pass, in a life that is being built carefully, not quickly. Middle school, high school. Marcus grew tall, taller than Daniel had expected, taller than Ida had lived to see. He kept the brown envelope in the drawer of his desk, and later in the drawer of his locker, and later still in the inside pocket of the first jacket he owned that actually fit him, a jacket Daniel had bought him for his 15th birthday, the first truly well-fitting thing he had ever worn. He kept Grandma Ida's letter inside the envelope. He had it laminated when he was 13 because the paper had thinned dangerously at the folds, and he could not afford to lose it. The lamination preserved the handwriting exactly as it was the penmanship of a woman who had taken penmanship seriously for 40 years. Every letter formed with intention, every word placed with care. He kept the shoes. He did not wear them after he outgrew them, which happened sometime in 7th grade. He set them on the shelf above his desk in his room in Daniel's apartment, next to the photograph of Grandma Ida in her classroom, the one where she was standing in front of the chalkboard with the chalk still in her hand and the expression on her face of a woman who is exactly where she is supposed to be. The shoes stayed on the shelf through middle school and high school, and the accumulation of trophies and textbooks and the other artifacts of a life being lived forward. They were the $2 shoes from the Goodwill on Halsted Street, cracked at the sole, frayed at the laces, double knotted, the way Grandma Ida had tied them the day she bought them, because she had said that double knotted laces never come undone when you need them most. Several people over the years asked him about them. His answer was different depending on who was asking and how much time he had. The short answer was that his grandmother had bought them and they meant something to him. The long answer took considerably more time and usually ended with the other person going quiet, in the particular way people go quiet when they have heard something that has rearranged a small piece of how they understand the world. He gave the long answer when it mattered. He was becoming good at knowing when it mattered. He got into Georgetown on a Thursday in March of his senior year. Daniel was at work. Marcus texted him a single word. He was in the kitchen making a sandwich when his phone rang 30 seconds later. Daniel's name on the screen, and when he answered it, Daniel said nothing for a moment, just breathed, and Marcus understood that his uncle was doing what Marcus himself had done on the stone bench outside the bank 8 years ago, composing himself, finding the words, waiting for the thing in his chest to settle into something he could speak around. "You did it," Daniel said. Marcus looked out the kitchen window. Chicago in March, still cold, the last of the winter hanging on. He thought about Grandma Ida. He thought about the kitchen table and the chocolate chip pancakes and the brown envelope sliding across the surface toward him, and her hands folded over his. "We did it," Marcus said. Georgetown in August was nothing like Chicago in November. The campus was green and warm, full of people who were beginning things, carrying boxes and duvet covers and the particular nervous energy of a life about to start. Marcus moved into his room on the fourth floor of a brick dormitory with windows that looked out over a courtyard full of oak trees whose leaves were still green and would not turn for another month. He unpacked methodically, clothes in the dresser, books on the desk, the photograph of Grandma Ida on the windowsill where the morning light would reach it, and on the shelf above the desk, the shoes. His roommate arrived an hour after Marcus did. He was from Connecticut, tall and easy in his movements, with the open, unguarded manner of someone who had grown up without much to guard against. His name was Patrick. He set his boxes down, shook Marcus's hand, and then stopped and looked at the shelf. He looked at the shoes for a long moment, the cracked soles, the frayed laces, the careful placement of them, the way objects are placed when they are not decorations, but monuments, when they are not there to be seen but to remind. "Bro," he said, "those shoes look like they've been through something." Marcus looked at the shelf. "Yeah," he said, "they have." Patrick seemed to sense that there was more to this. He sat down on his bed. "What's the story?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. He sat down on his own bed across the room, with the shelf visible above his desk and the photograph of Grandma Ida in the light coming through the window. "My grandmother bought them," he said. He looked at the shoes. "I was 10. We got them at a thrift store on Halsted Street in Chicago. They cost $2. Patrick nodded, waiting. "She taught elementary school for 40 years, Marcus said. He said it the same way he had always said things about Grandma Ida, without performance, without the rising inflection of someone trying to impress, simply as fact because the fact was sufficient. She rode the bus in the snow because she never bought a car. She ate store-brand groceries. She wore the same winter coat for 15 years, over 40 years of teaching, and 10 years of specifically saving for me. She put away almost $500,000 for my education, and at the same time, from the same account, every single month, she sent $25 to a scholarship fund for kids at her school she had never met." Patrick was very still. "The day I went to the bank to access what she left me," Marcus continued, "the branch manager saw these shoes and decided I didn't belong there. He picked up my grandmother's card and held it up in front of a lobby full of people and called me a fraud. He had me sit in a chair by the janitor's closet for 40 minutes and then told me to leave." He looked at his roommate. Patrick was not moving. "I kept the shoes," Marcus said, "because they're the reason he looked at me the way he did. He thought they told him everything he needed to know about who I was and what I deserved. He was wrong about that. But I keep them there to remember what it felt like to stand in them in that lobby, and to remember that right now, somewhere in Chicago, there is a girl in the 6th grade wearing shoes just like these, and someday she is going to walk into a room and someone is going to look at her the same way that man looked at me." He looked at the shelf for a moment. "When that happens, I want to already be the kind of person who knows what to do, the kind of person who has thought about it, who is ready." The room was quiet for a long time. Patrick looked at the shoes. He looked at Marcus. He exhaled slowly, the sound of someone setting something down that he had not known he was carrying. "That's an extraordinary reason to keep a pair of shoes," he said. Marcus almost smiled. She was an extraordinary person. He stood up and went to the window. Below in the courtyard, the oak trees moved in a late summer breeze, and the 100 conversations continued their patient beginning. Someone laughed at something. Someone called a name across the grass. He thought about Grandma Ida at the kitchen table. He thought about the brown envelope sliding toward him across the wood. He thought about the words she had said, the ones about the bank, about them shaking his hand about one day. She had been right about all of it. But, standing at the window of his dormitory room at Georgetown, looking out at the beginning of everything she had saved 40 years to give him, Marcus understood something that he had been moving toward for 8 years without quite arriving at, until now, a thing that had been taking shape in him slowly in the way that the most important things take shape without announcing themselves, until one day you turn toward them and they are already there, fully formed, waiting. She had not been right for the reason he had first thought. She had not been right because the bank had eventually treated him with respect, or because Conrad Hale had eventually faced consequences, or because the number on the screen had finally made people pay attention. Those things had happened. They mattered, but they were not the thing. She had been right because Marcus Webb had walked into that lobby and stood in those shoes and held his grandmother's letter against his chest and refused through 40 minutes in a metal chair and a lobby full of people looking away and a voice that called him by every name except his own to set down what he was carrying. That was what she had known. That was what she had been telling him, not just in the letter, not just at the kitchen table, but every time she pressed her thumb against a shoe in a thrift store aisle and said room to grow baby and tied the laces double knotted because the double knot holds when a single knot would slip. She had known he would need to carry something heavy through a hard place. She had spent 40 years of teaching and 10 years of saving and a lifetime of choosing to go without making sure he could. Marcus turned from the window. He looked at the shelf above his desk, at the photograph, at the shoes. He crossed to the desk and opened the drawer and took out the brown envelope. He removed the laminated letter. He unfolded it along the creases that were now preserved permanently in their softened state, and he read it as he had read it so many times that the words were no longer separate from his own thoughts, but part of the same continuous conversation, a voice that had not stopped speaking, simply because the person who owned it was gone. My brave Marcus. The world will sometimes be cruel. People will judge you by your shoes, your jacket, the color of your skin. They will try to make you feel worthless, but you are not worthless. You are my greatest treasure. Everything I have saved, everything I have worked for it, is all yours now. Use it to fly high. Use it to prove them all wrong. And remember, baby, dignity is not given. It is carried. Carry yours with pride, always, all my love, forever and ever. Grandma Ida. He folded the letter back along its laminated creases. He returned it to the envelope. He set the envelope in the drawer and closed it. He sat down at his desk. Outside, the oak trees moved. A door opened somewhere in the dormitory and closed again. Patrick was arranging books on his shelf with the careful attention of someone settling into a space that is becoming home. Marcus pulled a blank piece of paper toward him. He held the pen for a moment. Then he wrote one line. He read it back. He read it again. Then he folded the paper once and put it in the drawer next to the envelope with the laminated letter where it would stay until he knew what to do with what he had written and the full weight of what it meant. He sat back and looked at the shelf, the shoes, the photograph, Grandma Ida in her classroom, chalk in hand, standing in front of a chalkboard in a school where she had taught for 40 years with the expression of a woman who is exactly where she is supposed to be, not because the world had arranged itself to accommodate her, not because anyone had handed her that classroom or that purpose or that certainty, but because she had decided somewhere, early and permanently, that she would carry what she carried, and she had carried it every day for 40 years of teaching other people's children and 10 years of building something solid for her own, and she had never once put it down. That was the lesson. That had always been the lesson. He stood up and went back to the window. He stood in the late summer light of a place he had not been before and was just beginning to know, and he breathed slowly and evenly in through the nose and out through the mouth the way she had taught him, until the pressure settled into something he could carry. He would carry it the way she had carried everything she carried, quietly and for a long time and without putting it down. One day they'll shake your hand in there, baby, she had told him. You'll see. She was right. They did. But she had already known what Marcus was, only now at 18, standing at a dormitory window with the oak trees moving in the courtyard below, beginning to fully understand. The handshake was never the point. The point was the 40 years before it, the bus rides in the snow, the rubber cement and the broken zipper, and the reading glasses held together with tape, the $25 a month set aside for strangers beginning on the day a child was born, the letter written in careful penmanship by a woman who understood that the most important things a person can leave behind are not stored in bank accounts, but in the people who love them, in the way those people learn to move through the world, in what those people choose to carry and how they choose to carry it, and whether they put it down when the world makes putting it down feel reasonable and inevitable and kind. She had not put it down, not once, not ever, and neither would he. The point was carrying it, always.